Remember who Shiphrah and Puah are. They're going to be on the final exam. Friends, those were the words of warning that I at Union Seminary heard from people who'd taken the Hebrew Bible class before me. That there's so much, so many names, so many stories in the Hebrew Bible. It's intimidating to go in for an exam, but our professor always asked a question, a big question, about Shiphrah and Puah, and didn't seem to mind that every student got the warning from students who'd gone before that they absolutely must know about Shiphrah and Puah. Because I think that this professor wanted to make sure that everyone who went through his class had had time to reflect upon and think about the witness and example of Shiphrah and Puah and their courage and conviction not to let themselves become agents of oppression and even genocide. Friends, I would encourage us all to remember Shiphrah and Puah. Remember their example and ponder it. This Pharaoh had arisen. He no longer remembered, probably didn't care even if he did, about Joseph and the relationship that Joseph and the family of Israel had with the Egyptian people. All Pharaoh saw was those people over there are getting more numerous, they're getting more power, they're getting more wealth. Who do they think they are? And whose side are they going to be on if war comes? So Pharaoh, seeing an opportunity to solidify his base in current political speak, decides to make an enemy of those people over there. Decides to tell to his people that if we don't watch out, those people over there, they're going to come take our place and our position and our wealth and our power and our privilege from us. If we don't watch out, we're not going to recognize Egypt any longer. And so Pharaoh looks, and Pharaoh says, let us Egyptians set taskmasters over those Hebrews and get work out of them, because we are better than they. It's an old trick in the book. It's to make sure that those Hebrews can't get ahead. It's to make sure that we can continue to benefit from their labor and their work. And Pharaoh does it. But as he takes advantage of those Hebrew people, the relationship between Egyptians and Hebrews certainly doesn't become any better. And we can imagine it easily becoming more confrontational and more strained. And the idea that those people over there might have it out for us, if it wasn't true before, it's starting to be true now. And Pharaoh sees a problem, but it's one that he's going to nip in the bud. He calls in Shiphrah and Puah, these two midwives, these two women who have dedicated their lives to learning the art of bringing new life into the world, and commissions them to become agents of genocide. Shiphrah and Puah go out. Surely they're shaken. Pharaoh has given them an order, and one simply does not ignore the orders that Pharaoh has spoken. But Shiphrah and Puah also probably know they aren't about to do the horrible thing to which they've just been called. So they ignore what Pharaoh said. They ignore the orders that they have been given. They go out and they continue delivering babies. And when Pharaoh drags them in, Shiphrah and Puah have the effrontery and the temerity to speak a bald-faced lie. "No, Pharaoh, we've not been ignoring your orders, but you see, every time we get to those Hebrew women, they're so vigorous, you see. They've had their child already. There's no way for us to intervene. Not like those Egyptian women." Pharaoh, they come to Pharaoh and lie and then insult the Egyptians. They speak, probably fully knowing that a Pharaoh who has found it easy enough to order the deaths of every Hebrew baby born will find no problem at all in ordering 2 pesky and uppity midwives to be killed. But these midwives come in and declare through their bald-faced lie to Pharaoh that they will have no part being agents of his genocide. With their stand, they show that Pharaoh's call is horrific and is an affront to who they are. They fear God more than they fear Pharaoh. We're not told what happens to them other than God looks favorably upon them, and hopefully that's a good thing. But they go out, and Pharaoh is not deterred, and what happens next is chilling. He tried to use some agents to accomplish this genocide, but failing that, he now commissions his entire people. Whenever you see that a Hebrew baby has been born, throw him in the river. It's a horrible thing. And it must start working because Moses' mother fears for her child's life. There must be some Egyptians out there who are taking Pharaoh's words literally and doing this horrible thing. And there are probably other Egyptians out there who look and don't want to be part of the barbarity and maybe like their Hebrew neighbors, but when it comes down to it, are they really going to speak up and risk their own lives or their own children? I don't want my children to be lumped in with these Hebrews. They might throw my children in a river. I am going to sit and be quiet and let this storm pass me by, because in the end it just doesn't concern me. And it's chilling that Pharaoh deputizes his entire people into this crime, and they go ahead with it and along with it. Friends, this is a testimony to the ease in which good, ordinary, law-abiding people can be caught up in horrible acts when the horrible orders come from an established, a legal source. Too many of us, when it comes down to it, are ready to just follow orders because that is the safest and easiest thing for each of us to do individually. But friends, Shiphrah and Puah don't. And in the case of Moses' life is spared, remember, because maybe Shiphrah and Puah, they don't do what they're told. And Moses' mother puts the child in the basket, and Moses' sister puts the basket in the river and shepherds the basket down the river, and Pharaoh's own daughter takes the child and rescues the child and then gives it back to Moses' mother. And it's curious that Pharaoh has seen the problem of the Hebrews, the solution, the final solution to the problems of the Hebrews being killing the baby boys, but it's the women in the story. Shiphrah and Puah and Moses' mother and Moses' sister and Pharaoh's daughter who upend the evil orders that Pharaoh has decreed, who invert his desire to kill. Friends, this is a powerful story. But it's one that is chilling because so many seem to go along with the awful orders that they've been given. There's a book written by David Blumenthal looking at the Holocaust. It's called The Banality of Good and Evil. And the kind of central tenet is of course there are very evil voices in the time of the Holocaust, but so much of the actual work of the Holocaust is done by people who might be ordinary people, a lot like us, but they find themselves as cogs in the wheels of a horrible machinery and find it's just easier to follow orders and move along and not stand up and stand out. But he also speaks to the banality of good, that some of those, perhaps many of those who put their lives on the line to rescue others, did so not because of some overwhelming courage that stood out, but instead because of their identity and their sense of belonging to groups where life mattered and where the machinery, being part of the machinery of the Holocaust, was anathema. And they stood up and stood out because that is who they understood themselves to be, and that they would violate their identity of who they were, and maybe a few were part of a group such as a church group, and far too few church groups were like this, where they knew they had to stand up and stand out and rescue because that is who they were. Shiphrah and Puah, their first calling may well be to be midwives, bearers of life into this world. And when they're called to be agents of genocide, they cannot fathom doing any such thing. And so they ignore Pharaoh's orders. And when called to account, they have the courage and duty to lie, to ignore, to insult, all in the name of preserving life, because they're not agents of Pharaoh. They're agents of their calling to be healers. Friends, this is an amazing story of Shiphrah and Puah. And it should give us pause, because as we think of situations around us, and I think of situations in my own life, and these are silly examples, but where it's been easier to keep my mouth shut and not rock the boat. And if someone else is given a raw deal, well, at least it wasn't me. Friends, I remember with a certain amount of horror from my middle school years. And middle school is tough on everyone, but times when I looked at someone being picked on and thought, well, at least they're not picking on me, and stepped aside and let that go on. And I look around us and consider our history as a people, and think of Jim Crow in the South and the ways in which white supremacy was maintained in large part by telling some folks, you may not be much, but you're better than them over there, so help us keep them in check. Or I think about places and times today, and it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder, do I have the courage of Shiphrah and Puah? Do I have the core identity as someone who will speak out against injustice and brutality and oppression just because that is who I am? Or do I sometimes, too often, find myself thinking it's easier to just stay quiet and step away? Friends, our Presbyterian Church as a denomination in the coming week is taking an intentional stand against racism. And I think that's something that I want to look at and study with our denomination. And We'll share links in some of the coming devotions for those who want to look into that. And whether that's the tool or not, I think all of us need to be thinking about who we are and whose we are. For it's not nothing that in the Gospel of Matthew, in the first chapters, we find this huge echo of the Exodus story, where Jesus is born in a small town where a tyrant king has no compunction about killing all the children to wipe out Jesus before he can be a problem later on. Friends, such things happen, such things unfortunately continue to happen. But Christ comes among us. Christ comes among us as Savior, as Liberator. Christ comes among us, calling us to love each other and care for each other and be the people of God together, and put before wealth and status and power, instead, our identity as children of God, others' identities as children of God, and called us together to be the beloved community. Friends, it's something to think about. Who are we called to be? How are we called to live as we seek to be disciples of Jesus Christ, our risen Lord, who calls us all to work and follow and live as disciples? Friends, I think we can look at Shiphrah and Puah and see in them an example of what it is to be faithful no matter what and no matter the cost. To see in them the courage not to think mostly for our own life and well-being and status, but to realize that sometimes we are called to step up and speak out, perhaps no matter the cost. That's a scary thing. Friends, remember Shiphrah, remember Puah, for they and their actions are on our final exam. Do we, have we, will we live in such a way? I hope and pray that by God's grace, we might follow their example. Friends, grace and peace be with you this day. Amen.